Hello, George Romanic here. In the spirit of holidays, I will tell you a story today. A story of how I ended up studying atmospheric sciences and a story of how I was this close to become a ballerina instead of atmospheric scientist. To tell you this story from the beginning, because this is a lifelong story, I have to tell you a little bit about my past. I was born in Croatia in 1984, and at that time Croatia was part of former Yugoslavia, together with Slovenia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro and Macedonia. The educational system in former Yugoslavia was such that you have 8 years of elementary education, then you have 4 years of high school education, and then you have 4 or more years of undergraduate studies. The high school education can be general, and we call that gymnasiums, or it can be specific or specialized schools, and after you finish these schools, then you can only go to certain universities. For example, if you go to high school for a mechanical technician, then you can only go to some engineering university or faculty. On the other hand, if you go to high school for nursing, then you can logically can only go to university for medicine and so on, pharmacy and so on. So when I was born in 1984, it was close to the end of Yugoslavia, and civil war in Yugoslavia started in 1990 and started when I finished first year of elementary school. Since we lived in a zone where the war already started, after my first year of elementary school, we moved to another place, another town, village. And then I finished second year of elementary school in that other place, and the war came there, so we moved to the third place, and I finished third year of elementary school in completely different town. And then, unfortunately, war advanced to that town. And now you can connect the dots, and at the end of the day, you will see that I finished 8 years of elementary school by switching 7 different schools. Every year I went to another school because it just happened that at the end of that year the war would come to the place where I went to school. Now, at the end of elementary school, my family finally moved to Belgrade, capital of Serbia. And then there was no more war. There was no war in Belgrade, Serbia. But that also meant that for the first time in my life, I lived in a big city. Belgrade is more than 2 million people, between 2 and 3 million people. And I lived all my life before that in very small towns, villages, and so on. So that was the first time I actually experienced the life of big city. I met many new people, many new friends, and they are my friends until today, many of these people. However, that is a good part of the story, right? That I moved to big city, no more war. Not so good part of the story is that after you finish elementary school, to go to high school, you need to take entry exam. And as I said, there are 2 types of high schools in Serbia. Gymnasium, which is general education high school, and specialized high schools. Now, whoever wants to study some good university wants to go to gymnasium. These are the well-known schools across Serbia. And my brother finished one of the gymnasiums in Belgrade. He is older than me. So my parents wanted me to go to study gymnasium. However, as I said, I just moved to Belgrade. I met new people, and I started playing basketball, going out and so on. So I didn't study at all for entry exam. And there are 2 entry exams, mathematics and Serbian language and literature. So I went to take entry exam. It's mandatory to go to gymnasium. but I didn't study anything. And with my former elementary school education, I didn't know that much, to be honest, because as I said, I changed many elementary schools. In fact, in many cases in these elementary schools, because it was in war zones, we didn't have real lecturers, real teachers, but some person, let's say, knows mathematics, so he or she teaches mathematics, languages, and so on. They were not qualified teachers. At any rate, I went to take entry exam for gymnasium, and then, I took both exams, mathematics and physics. In Serbia, results of all exams are public, so you can go and see who failed, who passed. And I remember my mother was around that school when they posted results, and she went with friend. And then the way they post results is that you first have people what we call above the line. So these people passed and they are accepted for school. Then there are people below the line. These people passed, but not with good enough grades to be accepted to that school. And then you have people below the second line. These people failed. So of course she first checked if I'm above the first line. I wasn't there. Then she checked if I'm below the first line. I wasn't there. And then she checked if I'm below the second line, which means failed. And then I wasn't there. I wasn't on any line. I wasn't on any list. And then she checked the last name below, the last name at the end of the list. And that name wasn't printed with a printer, but written by hand. And that was my name. I had the worst score in Serbian language and literature. I had a score of -2. And the maximum score is 20. So if you answer wrongly some questions, you get negative score. So I basically answered negative all questions I could answer. So I was the worst student for the entry exam. And of course, I couldn't go to gymnasium. And then there is the second entry exam, second try. But for the second exam, you can only go to schools that have available spaces. And these are usually not so popular schools. So my father bought newspapers, because they usually post in newspapers the list of schools that have available spots. And we checked what are the available schools to go. And there were not many. And if there was available spaces, there would be 1, 2 students, 5 students, and so on. So it's tough to decide to take entry exam if they only accept 5 students and it's, let's say, 200 people applying. What's the probability you will be in these 5 students, especially when you were the worst student taking entry exam previously? So there was one school that had many available spots, and that was school Louis Davico for ballerinas. And my father said, well, that's it, you are going to be a ballerina. This is the only school that has available spots. You weren't good enough to go to gymnasium. You failed at the exam. Now there is no other option. You have to be a ballerina. Now, I have nothing against ballerinas, but the way I grew up, that was absolutely unacceptable for me to be ballerina. I would not survive in the environment where I lived, going tomorrow to train basketball and play soccer and telling my friends I'm going to be a ballerina. It's just not acceptable. So I took the newspapers and I checked more that table, and I saw at the end of the table, close to the end of the table, there was school called Geology and Hydrometeorology High School Milutin Milankovic. And it had around 20, 30, I forgot now, available spots. And then I was thinking the following. Well, geology, I was never interested in geology. But hydrology, these people are probably constantly diving and under the water, which is interesting. I could study that. And meteorology, that's probably like weather forecasting and stars, galaxies and stuff like that. And that also sounds very interesting. So I didn't know at the beginning which department in that school, which major to take. Would it be meteorology or hydrology? And then after a little bit thinking, I decided that I will study stars and galaxies. So I decided to try to study meteorology. Now I know probably many of you think that I was quite stupid and that I didn't know what is meteorology and what is hydrology and so on. But remember, at that time I just finished 8 schools in a war-torn country. I didn't have teachers to teach me. There were regular people that knew a little bit mathematics, a little bit of physics. So people like that taught me. I remember it was particularly difficult for languages in my elementary school. And that's probably one of the reasons why I never developed talent for learning different languages. Because for 1 month we would study French because there was a person that knew a little bit French. So I remember she taught us French for like 3 months, let's say. And then she left somewhere, it's a war, who knows. And then another person came and taught us German language for like 2-3 months or a few weeks, and then English and so on. So at the end of the day, you don't know any language. So that's kind of the elementary school education that I finished. And then, I decided to go and try meteorology. Now that's high school for meteorology. If you finish these 4 years, you get diploma of meteorological technician, and then you work at weather station, recording temperature, wind, and so on. So the school mainly focuses on instruments and not necessarily on theoretical background of atmosphere and atmospheric sciences. However, when I started studying that school, I became interested in particular in mathematics, and I finished school with highest marks. I was not the best student by all means, but I was among better students. And then at the end of these 4 years, I decided to study meteorology, which is Faculty of Physics in Serbia. And it's a small group, as everywhere around the world. Out of around 100 people that go to first year physics, only maybe 20 goes to atmospheric sciences. Out of these 20, usually few people, 3-4 finishes per year. I started loving atmospheric sciences. I was the best student in my class, together with Ilija Jovicic. I was not the best student ever in all generations. There were much better students, but in my class, I was the second best with Ilija. And I absolutely started loving physics. I started loving mathematics, especially at the university level, where things are taught more theoretically and more in depth, so to speak. When I think about it, I was this close to go and be ballerina. Instead, life took me to a completely other journey, and I ended up studying atmospheric sciences. If I could go back, I would never change. I would always study atmospheric sciences. It's one of the best research programs that you can study. And I'll explain in another video why I think atmospheric sciences are really the best sciences to study. So I hope you like this story. I hope for some of you it was inspirational. For some of you it was maybe a little bit funny. For some of you it was maybe a little bit boring. Then you can dislike the video, no problems. And that's all that I had for today. Happy holidays. Cheers. Until next video. Goodbye.